the fourth video on Romans, looking at Paul's third argument, his third section, which is chapters 9, 10 and 11, the Jews and God's purposes. Paul has established that despite universal sin, God's declaration of right standing before him is now available to all Jews and Gentiles simply by a person's faith in Messiah Jesus. He has also established that the power of the Spirit is not only superior to the sinful nature, but that it also fulfills all the law's requirements. In this third section, Paul turns to the matter of God's original purposes to the Jews, and he asks what their place now is, and if God has finally rejected them for their rejection of the Messiah. First, we should note that Paul begins and ends with more personal comments. He starts by lamenting the rejection of Messiah Jesus by many of the Jews, and he concludes with a song of overflowing praise to God for his mercy. The substance of the argument is this. First, in chapter 9, 6 to 29, he explains that election, which is the way that God chooses some and not others, is entirely consistent with his historical precedent for working with only a remnant. Not all who belong to Israel are Israel. Then in the middle section, chapter 10, Paul not only represents the operating principle of salvation, if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. But he shows the responsibility that God's people have for missing out on what he is now doing. This leads to the final stage of the argument, where in chapter 11, Paul asks if God has finally rejected his people. The answer is a definite no. True, they have stumbled badly, but God is well able to restore them. So God's remnant includes both Jews and non-Jews, both of whom, in different ways, have enabled God to bring the other into his saving purposes. The dominant and guiding feature throughout this third section is Paul's emphasis on the mercy of God. Our views and doctrines on election, predestination, and the sovereign salvation purposes of God must always be held in this light. Romans 11:32 is an important summary verse. For God has bound all men over to disobedience, that he may have mercy on them all.